I'm always interested in new perspectives about limb lengthening. So on episode 117 of my limb lengthening live stream series, I had the pleasure of listening to Nailed Legs. He's a prospective patient who's planning to get his own surgery done in the next year or two on his tibias and his femurs. And he's done a ton of research and he shared an awesome presentation packed with some really surprising facts about height, social pressures, and all of the things that go along with getting taller. And because I learned a lot, I wanted to share his presentation with you guys. And so without further ado, here is Nailed Legs.
Hey everybody, today I wanted to just present a few different things. Of course, we often hear about like the common questions like how much can we lengthen, what's it like lengthening, like does it hurt, things like that. I really wanted to talk about the less commonly spoken about topics. So the title of this is Height Distributions, Limb Lengthening and Mental Processes Behind Growing Taller. On the agenda, height distributions in the USA. So there's a lot of talk about, what's the average height. We have data on that. Zoomers, so Gen Z, are not height maxing. They're not gigatall. They're not 6 foot tall on average. Why 3 inches? Why not all 3 inches are equal? Why some benefit more than others? Understanding what a Z-score means, peak height velocity, and benefits of limb lengthening beyond the social, romantic, and professional benefits. So male height in the United States, simplified. The average or mean height is 5'9", so that's about 175.25 centimeter for those age 20 and up, so adults. Hispanics and Asians are the shortest at 5'7.1. Whites and blacks are about the same, and the tallest at around 5'9.4. I remember Victor was curious about like the demographic breakdown of it, so the CDC actually put out information in reference to that, so you can actually see different percentiles, the means, and then even just the age groups. So you get the different race groups and you get the different age groups, and you can see how they all differ. But in general, average height in the United States is 5'9" or 175.25 centimeter. The average American Zoomer is not 6 foot tall or 182.88 centimeter. You hear a lot of people online claiming how Zoomers are super tall. The data just doesn't show that. I haven't seen anything that shows that. If somebody could show me something that disproves it, I would greatly appreciate it. I think the reason why so many people today say, oh, Zoomers, and again, we're talking about America. I'm not talking about the Netherlands or, any Nordic countries, but I think, and this is my belief on this, and I could be wrong, I think the reason why so many people think Zoomers are so much taller on average is because heightism is becoming more acknowledged in life. So maybe years past, previous generations, it was easy for them to say, oh, height doesn't matter. It's just all about your personality, right? But I think nowadays young people are, especially through the internet and social media, they're more aware about how big of an impact height has on your life. So I think in response, and, maybe this is just conspiracy theory, but I think more young people are using lifts, or they're just using like thicker soled shoes, or, and you hear this on like, like the short guys forums and all that. It's on like, there's like a subreddit, it's called Short Guys, and a lot of them, they're like very short men, and they'll even say, oh, I never go outside, I'm always inside because, of my height and blah, blah, blah. So I think you're getting it from two ends, where people are wearing shoe lifts or height increasing shoes. And then the really short guys, because they're so aware about height negatively affecting their life, that they just don't really go out as much as, say, a tall person does. And if any of you are curious about this, go to a nightclub in the United States, and you will be shocked at how much taller people are there as opposed to, say, the grocery store. And so I think it sort of selects for that, but that's a whole nother topic that I won't get into. But if you're 21 and up, go to a nightclub in the United States. I've been to quite a few, and it's interesting just saying how the average height is a bit taller, even in a nightclub. So I think Zoomers are not actually taller. I think people are more height aware. Yeah.
I hear it all the time about how tall these young kids are getting nowadays. But when you look at the actual data averages from the CDC that Nailed Legs just talked about, it doesn't add up.
My 7th and 8th grade summer, I think I grew from like 6'1" to like 7 foot, like around that time.
The struggles in finding cute clothes.
Yeah, I think it's helped my family be a closer.
For example, you might have one super tall family member.
What's up, bro? Hey, nice to meet you. Joel, nice to meet you, bro. Oh, what's up? Everybody Everybody got their girl on the team. I contributed.
Yeah. Our water, it was nice and cold, you know.
He just got blessed with the growth spurt.
Or that friend who towers over the rest of your clique, and it skews your perception of what's normal, but statistically it's just an outlier and they don't reflect the broader population. However, according to Nailed Legs, what has changed isn't so much the actual height of the Gen Z population, but rather our awareness of it. And things like social media or using shoe lift insoles to make yourself taller, they all might seem like height is getting more attention than usual, and this makes it feel like everybody's base height is increasing. But let's face it, unless the average doorway has suddenly gotten taller itself, we're not facing this giant Zoomer takeover. So if kids aren't physically getting that much taller than the previous generation, why do we think that they are? Well, that leads into the next point, which is about the relativity of height metrics.
Relative versus absolute, and why 3 inches isn't always the same. So I wanted to use this example to kind of highlight why 3 inches isn't always the same. So if a 10-foot tall man or a 304.8 centimeter tall man lengthened 3 inches and became 10'3", would anyone notice? Would he notice? I don't think anyone would tell. They would just know this guy's super, super, super gigantically tall, comically tall. Nobody would notice a 3-inch difference on that man. Nobody. I don't even think he would notice. His life really wouldn't change much. He would still struggle to get into a car. 3 inches isn't going to change that. If he could fit into a car at all, he's not going to be able to get on a plane, whether he's at 10 foot tall or 10'3". Getting on a plane is going to be basically impossible for a man that's that tall. And a 10 foot to a 10'3" is an increase of about 2.5%. So that's the increase. Now, compared to, let's say, a 5-foot tall man or 152.4 centimeter tall man lengthens 3 inches and became 5'3", would anyone notice? Would he notice? I think a lot of people would notice. I think he would notice, as opposed to the 10-foot tall man. Now, the increase from going from 5 foot tall to 5'3" is about 5%. So even though they both lengthened 3 inches, or whatever that is in centimeters, 7.6 centimeter, the 10-foot tall man increased by about 2.5%, while the 5-foot tall man increased by 5%. So not all inches are the same, because there's a difference between the relative and the absolute. Very, very different. And then this goes a little bit more into it, why some benefit more than others when it comes to limb lengthening. So height is relative, right? Relative to your location and those around you. So, as I talked about before in like the last live, the average height for a man in like the Netherlands is something like 5'11" or 6 foot tall, somewhere there. I've heard different numbers there, but we'll just say 6 feet. Versus, in the United States, as we saw previously, it's about 5'9". And then if you go to some place like Cambodia or the Philippines, I don't remember the exact number off the top of my head, but it's something like 5'5" or something like that. So height is completely relative to where you're at, where you live in the world, because not everybody's the same height. Going into the next one, if you limb lengthened 3 inches, but so did everyone else in the world, would you feel any different? Would there be any change in your professional, dating, and romantic life? So I touched on this a little bit before in the last live. If you got limb lengthening and everybody else did, my belief is that you're not going to really experience any sort of benefit there, because height is relative, right? Relative to other people, not just in the world, but like who's immediately next to you. So if you lengthen 3 inches and everybody else does, well, let's say you want to be taller so that way you have better, financial prospects, because, we'll get into that later where, the taller you are, the more likely you are to make more money, or, correlation doesn't equal causation. Yeah. But besides that, I don't believe you would really experience any benefit, because everybody else grew the same amount. Percentiles. So if a 5 foot tall man grew to be 5'3", he would still be seen as extremely short. He would still be shorter than the average woman, and his percentile would only shift by about 1. So in a room of 100 men, he would be the absolute shortest man in the whole room. But if he limb lengthened 3 inches, he would be taller than 1 man in that whole room, even though he lengthened 3 inches. Now let's compare that to, say, if you're in like the 5'5" range. If you're 5'5", you're going to go from about like roughly 8th percentile all the way to the 34th percentile, meaning in a room of 100 men, you're going to be taller than 8. But if you limb lengthen, then in a room of 100 men, you're going to be taller than 34 of them. So we're going from being taller than one man to being taller than whatever that number is, like 34 minus 8. I'm not a numbers guy. So the difference, even though they both limb lengthened 3 inches, is way different. The outcome is way different. It's not the same. So this goes back into height is completely relative. 3 inches isn't always the same. It's different. Why some benefit more than others when it comes to limb lengthening continued. So in my opinion, height has more of a horn effect than it does a halo effect. And this is also backed up by the data when it comes to finances. So Height Journey actually did like a really good video about this. And sadly, the audio doesn't come through, but I can at least play it here. But basically, there's a big increase when you go from about 64 inches to about 66 inches. Then from there, 72 inches. So that's, what is that? I can't even remember off the top of my head. But, 6 feet. That's what it is. Sorry. So pretty big increases up to 6 foot tall. But after 6 foot tall, there's really no increase in income. You're making about the same. So there is a huge detriment to being short, but when you're super tall, there really doesn't seem to be a financial benefit here. Definitely recommend the video Height Journey made on that. It was very, very informative. And then, in my opinion, you don't need to be first. You just can't be last in life. Being short acts as a filter up to a certain point. What does Z-score mean and why it's relevant? So there was, I guess, some confusion on the Discord about the points that I was making, and I understand sometimes I can speak a little bit incoherent, perfectly understandable, but it was kind of a pointless thing to bring up, so I don't want to spend too much time on this. I'm just going to gloss over it. Z-score indicates how much or how many standard deviations an element is from the mean of its distribution. So Z-score of 0 means that the score is exactly at the mean of the distribution. So if your height, say your Z-score is 0, then that would basically mean you are 5'9". Z-score greater than 0, the score is above the mean with a positive value and indicates how many standard deviations it is above the mean. Z-score less than 0, score is below the mean with a negative value, indicates how many standard deviations below the mean. Z-scores can determine how unusual or typical a particular observation is within the context of the data set. Big note, I am not a numbers guy. If I'm in the wrong, I would love for a numbers guy like Socrates to correct me so that I may learn. I'm not, I don't work with numbers on a day-to-day basis. So if I'm wrong about something, please correct me. I would appreciate that. So here we have a bell curve, and we can see the breakdown of Z-score and standard deviations. Basically, it's the same thing. Z-score, standard deviation, you can use the term interchangeably. Again, I'm not a statistician, so maybe a statistician would disagree. That's okay. But for the purposes of this, it doesn't really matter. So as I said before, 5'9" would have a Z-score of 0 since it is the mean in the USA. Z-scores are useful because they standardize data points, allowing comparison between different data sets, which may have different scales and units of measurement. Why does it matter in this context? Well, it doesn't really matter. Z-score can be used when comparing different populations, such as comparing a 5'5" man in Cambodia to a 5'5" man, tall man in the Netherlands. So the 5'5" man in the Netherlands would have a much lower Z-score, as the average height is much taller in the Netherlands, even though their heights are the same. They're both 5'5", yet somehow, some way, the man that lives in the Netherlands would have a lower Z-score. Saying, have you heard of a Z-score on Discord without any follow-up or elaboration is like telling a physicist, have you heard of E equals MC squared? It means nothing by itself. Okay, and what's your point? Most are unfamiliar, and this is the key. Most are unfamiliar with what a bell curve is. Explaining the concept in simpler terms, such as in a room of 100 men, you're taller than just 15 of them, is easier to understand than telling someone what their Z-score is. So keeping this information as simple as we can, so that way the widest possible audience can understand what we're talking about here, is important. Not everybody in the limb lengthening community speaks English, or if they do, they don't speak it well. And so it's important to try to simplify everything as much as possible, make everything as simple as possible. And not everybody works with numbers. I don't work with numbers. So keeping things simple is great for educating. If you want to understand something well, try to explain it simply. Richard Feynman. Keeping things simple. It's going to allow you to learn the topic easier as well if you can teach other people in a simpler way, and it's going to allow them to understand easier. There's no reason to talk with big words, complicated words, if we can explain it in an easier way. Brevity is the soul of wit. An example of z-score standard deviations in real life. So here's one example of where this could be used. So Eli Lilly and Company proposed a definition of 2.25 standard deviations below the mean, or a z-score of minus 2.25 for idiopathic short stature, allowing them to sell the drug to otherwise healthy but short children. So if you guys are unaware, idiopathic short stature is basically a fancy way of saying you're short, but there's nothing wrong with you. You're perfectly healthy, you don't have any conditions necessarily, you're just short. One of the ways to basically solve that is by administering growth hormone to children. This is mostly, or this can really only be used prior to the epiphyseal plates or growth plates being closed. So oftentimes what doctors will do is they will give their patient who's going through this. So Lionel Messi, he's like a famous soccer player. Some of you may know him. He actually did growth hormone treatments when he was a kid. But oftentimes they'll give you growth hormones and aromatase inhibitors, which basically block estrogen from being produced in your body, as estrogen is primarily responsible for causing epiphyseal plate closure. So often those two drugs will be given in conjunction with each other, growth hormone and that as well. Not really relevant for us, though, because all of us are way too old to get on this, because all of our growth plates are probably closed.
Look, the reality is that height can play a certain role in everything from dating to job opportunities. And this isn't to say that tall people have it easy in life. No, but rather it's just saying that being shorter can create certain challenges that are worth acknowledging. For example, if you're in a room with a group of people, more often than not, the tallest person is going to get the most attention, whether we want that to happen or not. But averages matter too.
Peak height velocity, why we need to do physical therapy and recover from limb lengthening and not kids. So this is something that, I kind of just thought of one time. I was in the shower and I was like, you know what? Why is it that when I was a kid, or anybody was a kid, none of us had to do all this physical therapy crap, but as limb lengthening patients, we have to. And so, it got me kind of thinking, and I wanted to get a more definitive answer on it. And it all really just comes down to how much we're growing. So peak height velocity is simply the period of time in which a child experiences the fastest upward growth in their stature, i.e. the time when they grow the fastest during their adolescent growth spurt. So children grow a lot and don't require rigorous physical therapy and other interventions like limb lengthening patients. Why is that? Limb lengthening patients are growing a lot and fast. Typical femur lengthening is about 1 millimeter a day, or about 3 centimeter a month, equivalent to about 36 centimeter a year. During the adolescent growth spurt, i.e. peak height velocity, the average male typically achieves a peak height velocity of approximately 8.3 centimeter. So 36 centimeter versus 8.3 centimeter is a huge, huge difference. Obviously, I wanted to include this note here. Obviously, limb lengthening patients are not lengthening 36 centimeter. The purpose is just to highlight the difference in speed at which we're growing. So to put simply, limb lengthening patients are growing an incredible amount of length in such a short period of time compared to a teenager. Some kids can get complications similar to limb lengthening patients. So I may be mispronouncing this, but Osgood-Schlatter disease, kids can get complications too. Some children can get complications similar to limb lengthening patients. Osgood-Schlatter disease typically affects kids during their pre-adolescent growth spurt in the tweens, 10 to 13 for girls, and the early teens 10 to 14 for boys, and that's actually where boys are going to experience their peak height velocities in that range of around 13 on generally around 13. At this stage, a child's bones are typically growing faster than the muscles and tendons. As a result, the muscles and tendons have a tendency to become tight. That sounds a whole lot like limb lengthening patients. So some kids can experience similar sorts of complications, that tightness, the irritation that limb lengthening patients may go through. And I found that to be really interesting. Now, generally, not all kids can go through this, but, some kids are growing far more than that 8.3, centimeter per year. Some are growing, and I'm not a doctor here, but potentially even, 12 inches or more. I mean, who knows? They might grow up to be 7 foot tall, later in life, but they can experience similar complications to limb lengthening patients. But obviously, this is not typical because generally kids are growing at a much lower rate than limb lengthening patients are. But I did find this to be really, really interesting. Benefits of limb lengthening beyond social, romantic, and professional. The most notable effects from limb lengthening are the social, romantic, and professional ones. But there's still others. Lesser talked about, but still valid benefits are being able to reach the top of the fridge and cabinets, being able to fit more comfortably in chairs as your feet are firmly planted on the ground, not needing to hem new pants as more will just fit off the rack, and living in a world designed around the average height. So the things that I often think about myself and, talk about on the forum or on the lives are, like the big things like the social, romantic, and professional benefits of just being taller. But obviously there's so many more benefits, and it would be unfair to disregard those. Any people may have their own, reasons for doing it. I know myself, just sitting in a chair is often uncomfortable unless it sits low to the ground. And I'm sure a lot of other, short people watching this video right now can attest to this. If you're 5'5" or below, oftentimes your legs are, you're just swinging your legs off the chair, because your feet can't touch the ground. And that could, give you posture problems. I know it does for myself where, if you try to sit fully back in the chair as you should, the lip of the chair is then, jutting out into the back of your knees. You might not be able to even, sit fully back in the chair, which could negatively affect your posture. So there's 1,000,001 reasons to get, limb lengthening surgery. It's not, there's no one singular reason. There's many reasons. And I definitely don't disregard any of them. They're all valid. Just something to think about. Final key points and takeaways. So just as a summary, Zoomers are not super tall. 3 inches of height isn't universal. It's all relative. There appears to be an upper limit for the benefits of being tall, while there are severe consequences for being short, horn versus halo effect. In my opinion, and admittedly biased, I believe men around the 5'5" range, 5'6", 5'5", getting into 5'4", somewhere in that range. And again, maybe I'm biased. I think they probably have the most to gain from limb lengthening. I think that comes down to them being in striking distance of the average height. And you don't have to be first in life. You just can't be last. So if you're, let's just say 5'5", you do 3 inches of, limb lengthening. Now you're 5'8". You're only an inch away from being an average heighted man in the United States, which is easily made up for just by wearing, shoes. If you wear thick soled shoes, boom, you're at average height, if not exceeding the average height. So I really do think that men in that 5'5" range probably have the most to gain. Some people will benefit more from growing 3 inches than others. And please do not misinterpret this, but even though some may benefit more, that does not mean a 5 foot tall man will experience no benefit. I'm not saying that, if you're a 5 foot tall man, you should not get this procedure. I'm not saying that. My point is just that some will benefit more than others. That's not to say you shouldn't get it. You probably will see a benefit of the, those extra 3 inches, and it probably will be worth it to you, but some will benefit more than you. And discussion is good. This is really important. Discussion is good. as we can all learn from each other. My goal is to learn as much as I can about limb lengthening, as I want to go into the operating room having a complete understanding of what I'm about to undergo, not just surface level knowledge. Hopefully I can contribute to the limb lengthening community and share some knowledge too. I learned a lot just reading, patient experiences off the forums, looking at different research studies, listening, the interviews that Victor has done with the surgeons, trying to basically soak up everything like a sponge, because I want to fully understand what I'm about to place myself under. And I hope that I can give back to the community, like all the people that have, done their patient diaries and talked about their experiences. I'm grateful for all the people on the forum. I'm grateful for all the people on, Victor's channel, like Rial and Socrates, for talking about, their experiences. So that way, going into it, I'm going to be more knowledgeable about it. And I think just being scared about it, because it's a big procedure. It's a big thing. And so I think just getting a better understanding of what you're about to do is really important to kind of calm those nerves. And it's just important to know what you're about to do to yourself. I mean, there should be really no surprises. You should know the impact that it's going to have on you, the complications that could happen, but even like the small things, that's why I like to talk about these like lesser talked about topics. I think it's, interesting. It's fun to talk about, oh, how much can I gain? What do you think about my proportions and blah, 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 blah. But, I like to talk about the little lesser talked about things, because I think they're really important to help, give people a complete idea of what they're about to undergo. But on to the next thing. Thank you. Shout out to Height Journey and Victor. I stole that video from Height Journey there. I'm a little disappointed I couldn't get the audio to work. And then, of course, thank you to Victor for allowing me to present it. If anybody has any disagreements, please, let's talk about it. Let's discuss it. It's important to get to the truth. Perhaps I was wrong about something. Maybe you disagree with something that I stated in this presentation. I would love for you to bring forward your ideas, and, maybe I was wrong, and, please correct me. Let's learn together. Thank you.
I gotta say that this peak height velocity is a really interesting topic. I mean, imagine gaining several inches over a few months, hint, hint. Your body's gonna be facing some serious growing pains, and it's gonna need help to properly acclimate to this change. I wonder what that could be. Maybe physical therapy, stretching. Also, Nailed Legs points out that most of the time when we talk about limb lengthening, it's focused on the obvious, getting taller, checking your proportions, walking normally, scars, and so on. But like he said, there's a lot of other benefits that often get overlooked. And I think the best way to reap all of the rewards from your new height is to figure out which ones mean the most and the least to you in your life. And if you do this, then you can really take note of the biggest changes in your life. All right, guys, that's a wrap. If you have any questions about the topics that Nailed Legs covered in the presentation, I want to hear them. I'm sure he wants to hear them, so drop them in the comments below. I hope you found the video helpful. If you did, go ahead and hit that like button. And until next time, this is Victor from Cyborg for Life, signing out. Peace.